Good morning, or good afternoon, rather. Good afternoon. Good morning on the West Coast. Good afternoon on the East Coast. I am here with Jason Rosas. I'm putting down my arms, my share arms, that is. I think we are streaming, onto LinkedIn and Facebook at least. And definitely we are starting off the week. Let's see, I got to stop sharing this screen. Starting this presentation, this speech, this chat. I feel like I'm so confused today with Jason Rosas. Thank you, Jason, for your patience with me this morning. Cheers to you. Thank you for saying yes.
Inviting me.
All right. That looks like rum punch, but
looks like rum punch.
Looks like rum punch. But cheers to you. Thank you for saying yes. I saw that a few different people that we have in common, of course, across the way, because we're both in New York. And so, of course, there's definitely some people that are, liking the post because of you. So I'm glad that I got to finally speak to you. It's been a while. It's not been a while since we've talked specifically, but definitely since we've worked together. So correct. Yeah, we've had a good, nice run. So I always give you credit for stepping me out of my comfort zone with telepractice. I don't know if you know that, but especially with that, you were like, what, Don, you're the only one that knows it. So apparently you're the one. Do it. Go for it. So let's go.
Go for it. Exactly.
So I think that's the probably the way that other people feel when they're around you, that you give them very positive reinforcement and that you encourage us to be our best selves. So thank you for that. And on behalf of everyone else, probably that also feels the same way for you.
Oh, thank you.
So I met you, of course, when we were on the licensing board.
It was quite an interesting experience. I know I learned a lot from it, even though we didn't overlap too many years while we were on the board. It was still a really interesting experience, and I know that I learned quite a bit about the legal aspects of the career and the ethical practices, and just it helped me to refocus in terms of what it meant to be a professional in this career. So I was appreciative of that opportunity that when it was offered to me many years ago, and I assume that you have a similar feeling.
Agreed.
It was wonderful, your contribution to the licensure board, because telepractice had been fairly omitted for many years and peripheral to what we do as a practice. And lo and behold, here comes COVID, and it changed our world and our entire viewpoint on telepractice as a profession. So I'll take a step back and just give you a little bit of background about myself. I attended the University of Pennsylvania, and I was a psychology major, and I worked with Dr. Lila Gleitman, who was a linguist and psychologist who focused on language and the interaction between cognition and language. And she was the person who got me interested in psycholinguistics. And I wanted to do something practical in my career, not necessarily at that time doing research. So I found this career path. I ended up attending Teachers College at Columbia. This is in the late 1990s. And in 2000, I graduated from Teachers College. And from there, I had a varied career working in hospitals for most of my career, but also doing a lot of teaching and at the graduate level, teaching graduate courses in speech pathology at Long Island University and doing clinical supervision for many years there. And together, my clinical experiences, my teaching experiences, my supervisory experiences kind of all came together. I felt like I needed to do something more, so I pursued my doctorate at the CUNY Graduate Center, and I defended in 2022. And as you can imagine, that was a little bit of a whirlwind. I had been in the doctoral program for several years at that point, and I was eager to finish, but then COVID hit, and I had to pivot my entire dissertation on a dime because I couldn't collect data on people face to face at that time. So fortunately for me and how this all worked out, my mentors were willing and flexible to adjust and allow me to go through a completely different route. So I completely rewrote my dissertation topic, did research on telepractice, and ended up writing my dissertation on the professional identity of speech language pathologists as they transition from in-person therapy services to telepractice at the start of the COVID pandemic. So it was fortuitous that I knew about telepractice to an extent. I was already interested in psychology, and here I was in this field of speech pathology, working with a lot of clinicians at the time. And so together, that kind of piqued my interest about how people were dealing with this transition to teletherapy. And that's what I ended up writing my dissertation on. So now I'm at Adelphi University, entering at the start of my third year, and looking forward to the next phase of my career.
Excellent. Yes. So it has been a few years, because yes, I remember that you were in the doctorate program when we first started. And then, yes, as you said, I know that it took longer than originally anticipated. Let's just say it that way. So right. Yes, I'm seeing that there's several people on LinkedIn for you. So I'm hoping that this is going through LinkedIn, even though it's kind of got like a mixed signal. So trying to make sure. So those are
everyone.
I know. Let's see. So we got Pamela Rowe and Hadia, and and Hadia is also coming from Pakistan apparently. So like that, I love that. So let me make sure. Just checking in with people, but so this is DEI Speech IQ, of course. And so, one of the things that we talk about, of course, is diversity, equity, and inclusion, which again is something that you talk about a lot and have always talked about since I've known you, for sure. In reference oftentimes to multilingualism and bilingualism, specifically for Spanish speakers. But let's just go back a little bit and let us know, when did you realize that there might be a disparity in speech language pathology for the DEI needs, I guess, of our, of us as, as professionals, and of course our clients. So what was your turning point or your awareness point?
Well, I had two. One was the academic turning point, and one was the personal one. So I'll start with the academic one. So while I was in graduate school, I was fortunate enough at Teachers College, they were just beginning to explore the idea of a bilingual extension program there. And they were presenting the graduate students with many courses in bilingualism and bilingual assessment and intervention services. And bilingual education practices in general. So it was through those initial years of study that I understood fairly early on, before I was a practicing clinician, that the assessment system and the way that professionals and the education system in particular, but not to exclude the healthcare system, incorrectly and unfairly evaluate and assess children with language learning disabilities, but particularly those children of color, Black and Hispanic populations in particular. So I obtained my bilingual extension through Manhattan Marymount. I didn't complete my bilingual extension at Teachers College. And there I basically took the set of classes all over again. And I ended up using that to continue teaching about bilingual assessment and intervention practices while I was at LIU Brooklyn. And that was also a wonderful experience, because I had mentors who were in the field and who had championed this kind of work for many years, including Sylvia Eudice Walters, who passed recently. And I wanted to continue. I wanted to continue in that legacy. So I did a lot of study in bilingualism while I was in graduate school, but the majority of my work in bilingualism was clinical, and in trying to teach the principles of proper assessment and intervention for Black and Latino populations in particular here in New York City to graduate students. Because I think one of the main issues is at this moment in time, our profession continues to be, although it's changing very slowly, it continues to be over 90% white. And so the goal can't be that only people of color who become speech pathologists are able to do this work. We need SLPs of all colors to understand the work that they have to do, because chances are they will be working with a child who is Black and Latino and may or may not have a language learning disability. So part of this work is demonstrating that this work can be done, that you do not have to be a person of color to do this work, that you can be an ally, that you can be white and still serve people of color appropriately and do the right thing by them and for them. So that was my bigger professional kind of bent on things. But on a personal level, my adopted brother was a child with multiple delays and deficits in language, occupational therapy, dyslexia. He had a gamut of different deficits. And initially, he received services through early intervention. And my mom was receiving the news very early on: don't talk to him in Spanish, talk to him in English. Right. So this is an initial window. And part of it, in your mind, you had that rationalization. Maybe they're right. Maybe they know more than we do. Right. They're the professionals. Yep, and lo and behold, you start to understand these processes. You understand what normal development is like, or what the normal experience is. And the research starts to tell us, no, this is not something that is necessarily true. That certainly what you want is great input, that you want to be able to make sure that you are speaking the language that you know best. And asking my mom, who was not a native speaker of English, to speak English to my brother wasn't doing a service to either of them. So that was an example of how it affected me personally, and certainly seeing him go through the educational system and receiving speech services and special education services for his entire educational career was an eye-opening experience for me. And it kind of gave me my first experiences as an advocate for children with who happen to be bilingual and with learning disabilities.
Right. That perspective is really very interesting too, because we do hear that even still in some circles, in some, kind of areas where people don't understand that competence of in any language may matter, and yet the concepts of language as a whole can come from both sides. It can come simultaneously. It can come in sequence, so to speak, one language first and then another language afterwards. But again, putting that burden, so to speak, on the families and giving them kind of those instructions, that it is hard to know which one is best by themselves, so to speak. So a lot of people do have those kind of questions where, should I be still speaking to my child in a different language when they're struggling, so to speak, in English, meaning that English is their particular language of, most of the time, language of education or academics, so that the child is, being able to be serviced. And then, of course, I will say, if, I'm being, adding on to that list, which is that, do we have enough speech pathologists with a second language, period? Any of the second languages, any of the first languages. Do we have enough of them to service? And that makes, that adds another layer of complexity to the question marks that a lot of families face. So absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, here in New York, we have a pretty good distribution of Spanish bilingual SLPs.
Sure.
But the system is kind of constrained because you have to have the bilingual extension associated with your TSSLD. You have to be employed in a particular district that happens to serve bilingual children. So if you happen to be a Spanish-speaking bilingual child who's in the neighborhood or in a district that's predominantly not Hispanic and bilingual SLPs aren't commonly employed there,
right,
then who are you getting as your SLP? They're not going to bring a bilingual SLP to your school necessarily, and it makes it rather difficult for those parents to be able to get those services. So
absolutely,
that's one thing that we want to keep in mind. Even though the numbers may be high, we want to make sure that systems are put in place that makes it possible for the services to be accessed appropriately.
absolutely, yeah, absolutely. That's really great points. I definitely agree that this is, still something that we are working through. So I'm glad that people like you are able to voice it and, and explain it and give perspective, specifically personally also. Over the years, and again, we're talking a little bit about whether or not it's changed. I guess what positives or negatives would you say have happened over the years since, kind of us, the original version of when you knew about it? How well has this progressed for you, in your perspective, at least?
How well has DEI worked?
Right. So the DEI perspective again, and whether or not, students, in some ways, whether or not academia prepares us, because you're in academia and
right,
have been in and out of academia, of course, but
right,
just, in the community also, like looking at
right,
it from, yeah.
Well, I'll say that it's very difficult. It still continues to be a challenge, right? For as many SLPs that there are who are providing services bilingually, we also have to consider that a very small proportion of those individuals who are clinicians will end up going to teach in higher education, right? So if they are not the teachers who are teaching these concepts, who is? And in the meantime, we can't wait for a whole group of individuals to come through the system and make sure that they are Black, Latino, bilingual, and being able to teach these services, these skills to clinicians. We need our current educators, our current faculty to train themselves and be able to deliver these messages appropriately, which could be that graduate programs have standalone courses that address these issues, and that they have or that they make an attempt to infuse bilingualism and the necessary cultural competencies, cultural humility, cultural responsiveness training to be able to be successful as a clinician. So all of that has to happen at the same time. It can't be halfway. We can't wait for things to happen. We have to do it now.
Love it. In some ways, that kind of goes to the question that most people are, get stumped on. But you seem to be casting a vision already. What do you think is like you could, if you would, be able to have your own vision of what could happen, so to speak, in speech pathology? This feels like you're going there, but let me make sure that we get this clear. What would you love to see happen? Other than us all learning a second language, which is also part of my dream.
No, that's not realistic in the United States, right? Because that's not the structure that this particular environment has designed, right? It is still a Eurocentric and English-centric format, right? Can you hold on a quick second? I'm sorry.
Yes, no problem. So Jason obviously is got something more important to do. No, I'm teasing. Let's make sure everything is as it's supposed to be. All right. I think so. To the audience that's on LinkedIn, especially, thank you for joining us.
And thank you for your patience.
Yes, thank you for your
sorry about that.
Also, that's okay.
What I was going to say was that one of the things that's most important, I think, to the work as a clinician that every program can do from the very beginning is to start early and continue improving every clinician's understanding of implicit bias and the consequences of not reflecting on those potential implicit biases that can affect your assessment and intervention practices. So everyone has them. Everyone has to deal with them. They are useful in many ways to create ideas and representations that help us move through our days faster. Okay, the ideas that create these biases. The problem is that inadvertently and intentionally in some cases, but most of the time, implicitly, we decide to assign attributes to people that are negative. And that negative attachment is what then bleeds into our interpretation of how a person is responding and why they're responding a certain way. And we make a choice about whether we're going to diagnose and say that this person has a disorder or not based on that bias. And if you don't address those ideas directly, consciously, and with other people openly, you're not going to get at that root problem. Without that, it doesn't matter who the clinician is, whether they are a clinician of color or not. Everyone who is not doing this critical work is in line for a poor outcome, a poor assessment or a clinical outcome. They are putting themselves in a position where they're increasing the likelihood that they are going to discriminate against a child. And it could be a child of color. It could be a child who's bilingual. It could be a child who's poor. It can be any number of different parameters on which we can discriminate a child upon. All of those features can affect our judgment, and we have to be mindful and we have to be thoughtful, right? And right now we're talking about issues of race, but it could also be about sexual identification, right? Gender identification, things that we are more and more in more recent years becoming more aware of and understanding about. But unless you do that work, it's not going to change. You're still going to get the same outcomes. You know, we wonder, why is it that Black and Latino children are disproportionately affected by special education services? And it's not surprising that the special education modalities, the dimensions on which you can be federally labeled as having a language learning disability, the ones that we see the most disproportionality on are those that require the most subjectivity, right? We don't see it in blindness, in hearing acuity, in orthopedics. We see it in speech and language, in emotional disturbance, in learning disability, right? Where people are judging, they're making their best guess estimate about what they think this person is going to benefit from. And what you end up seeing is that oftentimes Black and Latino children, depending on where they are, may be over-referred or under-referred for the services. There's no reason why that should be the case.
Yeah, agreed.
We know that it's happening.
Yeah.
So it has to be something about the subjectivity of the work that we do. So how do we get at that subjectivity? How do we get at improving clinicians' ability to make better subjective judgments and use as many objective tools as possible to help them make that subjective opinion sharper?
You know, what's really interesting and what it's reminding me of is that we often talk we try to reinforce this version of evidence-based practice, and we talk about it in academic circles, so to speak, and with our students, and we kind of throw this term around. But I think that it does get lost in the mix when they are in the field, right? So by the time that they're professionals, it's like, run on instinct, have your clinical instinct, follow your intuition. And then that evidence that we really need those objective versions of things, because again, instinct and clinical impressions and clinical professional opinions and professional determinations are of course important. They're part of this, but the truth is that sometimes we can't rely on it. That's really what the bottom line is. We can't say that we're being objective when we are making things without some evidence, making decisions, without some evidence behind it. In other words, what we sometimes call evidence is oftentimes our biases, which is part of the problem. And this is not something that's unique to speech pathology. It is something that is unfortunately, like you said, across educational platforms, but also across health platforms. That's one of the reasons why maternal health and death in maternal delivery of certain populations, specifically Black women and Latino women, but specifically, they are having more problems around their maternal health. And again, I'm saying this only because as we are considering ourselves in, speech pathology and what we have to do and how we need to move ourselves forward, how we need to improve ourselves in the way that we think about these things, especially, as you said, kind of really this is called cultural humility, right? So it's reflecting back to yourself, saying, what do I know? What am I really basing this on? And then coming back to that version of things, we are not by ourselves in doing so. We are in a community of people, namely, academics, education, health fields, all these related services, that we are with them also. Like they are also still working on those things. It is not set. It is not, that everybody else has it right and we don't have it right. We don't have it right, and other people also do not have it right. And some people, it is a life and death situation. Some careers, it makes a difference. And in fact, in some of our situations, of course, for the sake of argument, dysphagia, laryngectomies, some of these medically involved cases, those are big decisions that we're making also as speech pathologists. So, sometimes those are, obviously also.
Absolutely. There's the cultural and linguistic considerations that we talk about in DEI are not specific to speech and language and learning. It affects every person of every age, every culture, because, think about what we do in general, right? When we go see a professional, the expectation is that that person has knowledge and they're going to use that knowledge to steer us in the right direction, right? And so oftentimes, because of that differential in experience and power, we're deferred to. They expect us to be the experts in these domains. So it's all the more that we have to be responsible and ethical and be humble about what we know and what we don't know, and be truthful about what we know and what we don't know, and work with families, work with physicians, work with teachers, and all of the other individuals that collaborate with us in healthcare and education and in community, that makes the work come closer to the objective truth of the person's situation. It's hard, right? This is not easy work, but what we're trying to do is get a little bit closer. Something else that you said made me reflect on, what else we can do, right? In terms of the clinical practice, in terms of graduate training, not only embedding this knowledge, this cultural humility practice and cultural responsive framework, but also we have a habit in speech pathology of training clinicians in a lot of different domains in a shallow manner.
Ooh.
Right? Because there's a lot of things that clinicians have to learn.
Right.
But this kind of work requires deep thinking, right? It requires kind of getting past the surface of here's what the problem looks like, and consider what can be attributed, what can be affecting this problem that led to it, and that can keep it from improving in the future, right? So there's much more that we need to dig into. So there's a thought in my mind about having to change the way that we provide clinical instruction to our graduate students, not just in our field, but I think in all healthcare related fields and in education fields, anywhere where it is possible that you can find increased subjectivity affecting your relationship with the people that you're trying to serve. So, but particularly with speech pathology as our field of interest, I would say you can't do this work just by seeing dozens of kids in a lot of different places, or a lot of different adults in a lot of different places with a lot of different conditions, just so that you can check off that you've gotten the right amount of hours, right?
Yes.
It's not, that should not be the only goal. Certainly ASHA's looking forward, writes down our guidelines with concerns to competencies.
Yeah.
But again, competency is a minimum standard rather than the maximum standard. So I think that there needs to be a change in the approach that helps us move slightly away from just being adequate and being what the population needs us to be, experts.
Right. Absolutely. No, that's a lot to take in, and definitely agreed. I mean, part of it is like, do we need an extra year? We have the CF year, of course. Then you get a little bit more specialized in one particular setting. But the truth is, I know that there's been definitely conversations, but at least comments when students are leaving that they got 1 hour in, this particular thing that's enough, or so to speak, like it checks the box, which is what you said. And it's like, oh, I wish that there was more time, frankly, for them to do those things. And yes, to be honest, of course, just because we're in academia, the other part is that I was listening recently to a Malcolm Gladwell podcast for revisionist history, and it was one of the things that he mentioned about of course universities, colleges being a business like corporations, right? So that's part of it. Like the bottom line, these are expensive degrees that people are getting.
Sure.
It's hard to say, do extra, because it costs students money. It costs us money, but it costs students money. We can't hold them hostage, so to speak, to doing something more when the basics or the necessities, the bare necessities, is kind of like enough for them to get a foothold in some ways for what they need to do. But the next steps is like, we actually need to stay more, that this is not the end of the line. Like, this is the reason why, as professionals, to maintain our licenses and our certifications, that we continue to have continuing education, for example.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
So
yeah, I agree with you. I don't think that the graduate programs, undergraduate and graduate, are designed or set up for that. They're generalists, right? That teach you everything, a little bit of everything.
A little bit.
And certainly I think that the goal isn't to make students think deeply about every single client, for example. The goal is to teach students how to think deeply and practice that initially, somehow, in your graduate experience, those 2 years, which is a long time, and then hold the clinicians accountable. So we have continuing education credits, and right now there's a movement towards specialization. And so if you are working in different areas and people want to specialize in certain things, let's make sure that we are, again, experts and seeking out specializations. There's no reason why we shouldn't be continuing our education. We need the hours for continuing education anyway. Make those experiences richer, make those learning opportunities richer for the speech language pathologist who's licensed, who's already out there working with kids and is not in graduate school right now and is affecting children as we speak. They need this just as much as anybody else. So how do we make sure that our graduate students who are coming through the system will walk into a professional environment that's going to sustain them and make sure that they're doing their very best? Let's see how continuing education perhaps can change its focus to make sure that the clinician is not just checking off the box of 1 hour of cultural bilingualism or cultural education and 1 or 2 hours of ethics, but rather that they are doing a deeper study, that they are indicating in some way that they are involved in this work.
I love that. I love that. And also you're thinking, of course, of the professionals as they're in the field, as they're continuing their education, and not just as students necessarily. Students are the starting point, but it's definitely not the ending point. So absolutely, I wholeheartedly agree with you that, you know, a lot of times we, unfortunately or fortunately, you know, focus a lot, I've realized over the years, on talking about academics, but also academic settings, that is, as if that's, you know, the only kind of important place that we need to be. And then, of course, leaving out professionals in a lot of ways. And I just see that with some of our state associations also, that the state associations, a lot of times, you know, the people that are participating and that are giving the presentations, of course, are from academic fields, yay us, you know, because we're there, but also we definitely need, you know, those hands-on practical people that are in the field, in the trenches in many ways, and also just have different perspectives. They are also, frankly, in fact, more so than us in academic fields, dealing with people on a regular basis, day to day in the field, whether it's coworkers, whether it's, you know, as we know, clients, patients, students. You know, we have, you know, a lot more people that are not in universities than we have that are in universities. So,
Yeah,
you know, that's the thing.
absolutely. There was a recent podcast that a colleague of mine shared with me, I think it was on the Daily, and they were talking about the decreasing numbers of students in higher education, that there's been a decrease of 2.5 million fewer students in the past 20 years overall.
Okay.
And I believe that was the range. And why that might be the case. And that's because the population is jaded, right? There's a general consideration about what it means to be educated, a bit elitist. It has a bit of forgetting the common man. And education has become increasingly expensive, making it harder for the middle class to be able to achieve that education. So you're making it harder to get into college, to survive college. And when you come out, you're not necessarily earning the same or more than you thought. Maybe
or that you could have done it without necessarily having that additional, correct, frankly, you know, financial burden, and that you could potentially make that same money differently, so to speak, without that piece of paper that says I'm qualified in this thing. Unfortunately, believe me, I definitely wish that we, you know, were able to get paid per, you know, degree that we have, so to speak, more so. Yeah.
The problem is that there aren't that many trade jobs too. Like if you say, okay, let's have more trade opportunities, right? Becoming a plumber, becoming a welder, right? Unfortunately, there aren't an abundance of jobs in those career fields also. So our society isn't designed not to have an education system where people are going to college and getting degree, those specialized skills. So
that's the next level.
Be thoughtful about how all of these things interact and how it affects why people are going into the different fields that they're going into, and why would a person choose speech language pathology over any other field, right? What's the benefit, right? You have to have a passion for this, but you also want to earn a living. So how do you balance all of those things if you've made it so expensive that you're not going to be able to see a positive return on your educational investment because you're not being paid well when you get hired by a school or a healthcare facility, right? So all of that have to be balanced.
Yes.
It's very complicated.
Absolutely, it's very complicated. We talked about this for so long, and I'll just throw in this last thing because you prompted me in my head. So as my new role as an externship coordinator, and the fact is that these students are going to these externships, which, you know, some people call internships. So for those that are not familiar, we talk about internships as like things that we do on campus, like in-house, so to speak. And then externships we talk about as they're out in the field, so to speak, under the supervision of somebody else, but we don't pay our externs. They don't have internships where they get paid, where other fields do have that. And there may be opportunities even as in a bachelor's degree setting where somebody can get a bachelor's degree and therefore have paid internships, namely outside work, to support their learning process. So again, this is definitely something that's been bothering me greatly for the last few years. But in particular, lately, I'm in the position where I'm now placing students. So it makes it even more like prevalent in my face. So again, yeah, we need more.
I think Asha needs to advocate for, how much, what the fees are, for Medicaid and Medicare reimbursement, because quite honestly, the speech pathologist salaries, when they are employed by the Department of Education and by healthcare facilities, is based on the Medicaid and Medicare reimbursement costs, right? So for every person that you see, how much money are we likely to get? And we're going to base your salary off that because we need to pay our overhead, right? And so if there's a cap in that, and it has not changed
for years, for decades, I feel
hasn't changed, but we want our salaries to grow. Guess what? It's only it can't grow. The companies are going to push back because they say we can't survive if we keep paying you more.
I know
it's cutting into our bottom line. So
I know
ASHA and our state organizations, they have to do a lot of lobbying to make sure that at the root cause, right, how reimbursement works also benefits the clinician. And not just, I would imagine, not just speech pathologists, but all the healthcare and education. Because again, the Board of Education is billing Medicaid and healthcare and the insurances for the services covered. So it affects us no matter in what setting we're in.
Right. So unfortunately, our time is running short. In fact, our time
is over.
A little over, frankly. But I do not want to miss out on at least we're going to do this quickly, of course, but as quickly as possible, I'll say. But I do want to ask the question of the month, so to speak. So the Hispanic Heritage Month starts the middle of September and ends the middle of October because, hey, whatever, we'll do it. We'll put a little sazon on that and make it happen. But throwing it off a little bit. But as far as our months are concerned, but it has begun. And so I am pleased, but because actually last night, they did our students did our DEI task force at the university did a Hispanic Heritage event, and it was really well attended. So I'm so glad about this. But our question for you is, my question for you is, I am the royal we. My question for you is, which author or book would you recommend to our viewing audience that is related to, so to speak, somebody who is Latino Hispanic?
There's many that I can think of.
Okay.
But oldie but goodie that I think that should be read is Down These Mean Streets by Piri Tomas. It is like a memoir of his life in New York, in Harlem, growing up as a Latino in a Puerto Rican household, and his challenges in the community that didn't see him and didn't know how to help him, and what resources he needed to fall back on in order to feel like he needed to help himself.
Wow.
And it's just a glimpse into the struggles of some children in our communities and the real risk that comes when we aren't fully present for our children and the children don't know where to find that support that they need. He was able to find his way, and was able to write a book on his story based on his experiences. But so I think it's a powerful book.
And say the name of the book again and the author, just to make sure.
Yeah, let me see if I have,
Name of
no, it's not here, even though I thought I might have it. Interesting.
Yes, I'm sure you have
Down
it.
These Mean Streets.
Yes, Down These Mean
by
Streets.
Piri Thomas,
Nice.
Piri Thomas,
Nice.
Thomas.
Correct. So thank you again, and cheers to you. How can people get in touch with you if they want to collaborate or,
Sure.
Just
reach out. I am on LinkedIn, and I can be reached out by my email address at Adelphi University. It is the letter J, Rosas, ROSAS, like the flowers, Rosas, but with an A instead of the E in English, at Adelphi, ADELPHI.edu.
Correct. So thank you again. Cheers to you. Thank you for joining me today on DEI Speech IQ.
It was a pleasure.
I appreciate you. I look forward to seeing you again. I'm sure I'll see you again soon. I don't know that, but I'm sure I will. I suspect I will. And so I'll again want to thank the audience for joining us on LinkedIn, on Facebook, if you're there. And I look forward to, my next presentation for DEI Speech IQ and through World-Class Speech Services, #business. And of course, have a great day and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye. Thanks, Don.
Thank you.